Our next speaker will be introduced by Susan Wachter. Susan Wachter is the co-director of the Penn Institute for Urban Research. She is also the Richard Worley Professor of Finance and Professor of Real Estate and Professor of City and Regional Planning. She has many titles, first at the Wharton School and secondly at Penn Design. Susan?
But the best title of all is colleague of Jeannie Birch and partner. Good morning to all, and what a great day this is going to be, and to inspire us further as we really get into the work of this afternoon. It is my distinct honor to introduce our next keynote speaker, Sheela Patel, who will be providing a view from women in vulnerable habitats on issues of habitat and health. Sheela Patel's work exemplifies what Penn IUR and all of us here today, in fact, I believe, are hoping to work towards in initiatives on global health and for us on initiatives on global urbanization and its challenges. We just heard from Julio Frank on the need for a comprehensive focus for global health solutions. Not only does Sheela Patel get this, but moreover, her life embodies how to act in response to these challenges. These challenges are global in scale, but they are local and place-based also. Her life and her work are key going forward, and we are privileged to hear directly from her in how to respond to the challenges of urban poverty. Sheela Patel is the world's foremost campaigner on behalf of slum dwellers' rights, beginning and ending with women. She is internationally recognized for the persistent struggle for decent living conditions and human rights. She is the founder director of Society for Promotion of Area Resource Centers, SPARC. This NGO was established in 1984 specifically to address the problems, and the word is far too small a word, for women pavement dwellers, the life problems for women pavement dwellers in Mumbai. She has been the key figure in building up Mahila Milan, which is a decentralized network of collectives of women living on pavements and in slums throughout India. Bringing women together specifically around savings and credit activities, and interacting beyond and impacting the world of government and formal institutions to secure shelter and basic amenities. The alliance of SPARC and Mahila Milan collectively has successfully tackled urban poverty through strengthening grassroots groups of the poor themselves. Under Patel's leadership, SPARC has catalyzed the construction of housing for 10,000 families through 70 cities in India. And beyond India now, Patel is the chair of Slum Shack Dwellers International, the international network of people's organizations and NGOs that support them, using Indian experience to inform initiatives across Asia and Africa. In September 2009, Sheela Patel received the David Rockefeller Bridging Leadership Award that, among other awards, recognizes her efforts to ameliorate urban poverty. Please join me in welcoming Sheela Patel.
First of all, thank you for calling me, and as our other speaker said, persistently making sure that I got here. When you first invited me, I said, what am I doing in a health conference? I work on habitat and infrastructure, and what am I doing with a college of nursing? And then my colleagues reminded me that before we started SPARC, we used to work with 5,000 really very poor women in the inner city of Mumbai. And a very major part of what we did was to help poor women send their kids to school, address the issues of their own health and their family's health in an environment where they were migrants, where they had no identity as residents in the city, and who came from all over India following their husbands or their family and living in terrible conditions in which the city completely sought to push them away. And it was their persistence and their commitment for finding a better life for their children that they survived this social violence of governments attempting to evict them. It was also that decade in my own life when I worked in a community center in the phase which I call managing poverty, trying to make existing useless systems include poor people and poor women. And that was the time when these 5,000 women trained a young set of feminists to begin to understand the lives and the thinking of poor women, taking us away from our individualistic, aggressive feminist perspective to one of caring, nurturance, and inclusion, and for looking at the transformation of their lives and ours as a marathon rather than a 100-meter dash, which very often our development investments try to be. And that's why my new title is, Are Women Victims or Are They Warriors? And I'm saying that they're warriors, but it's a question of lighting that fire. I have 4 pages of statistics that I'm going to throw away because they've all been said more succinctly and more smartly and much better by my previous speakers. But I have 3, which I think are subsects of what they've said. The first one being that 45% of all child marriages in the world happen in India. It's a recent statistic that I learned. The other one is that in the Indian subcontinent itself, the ratio of men and women is beginning to really worry all of us. In a recent article written by my very dear friend Kalpana Sharma, she referred to recent data that said that there were 40 million Indian women missing, either due to abortions of female fetuses, infanticide, girl children dying of malnourishment when there were choices of who to look after and who to take to the doctor, women who commit suicide due to harassment and violence, and of course all the other issues. But for me that was a startling piece of data. The other one was that although more and more girls are going to school, many more are leaving schools, and the primary reason is the lack of toilets and transport, taking them to school. Some of us were in the toilet in the break, and we decided that the issue of sanitation and toilets must be something we should champion very strongly at the end of this particular conference, because it cuts across so many things that are important for women. I also feel that many of us as health professionals, however much we are, or professionals in all the different fields we are, and however much committed we are to women, women become beneficiaries and consumers of our information and our help. We tell them what they must do. We rarely use the concept that the earlier speaker said about creating knowledge as a public good as something that we do in our communication. I still see health workers talking to poor women who have no access to clean water about hygiene and washing hands. I hear about women being trained in providing nutritious food to their children when they don't, the whole family doesn't even earn half a minimum wage. And so a very important and critical lesson, I think, for all of us to look at and think carefully is how do we communicate our insights, the output of our knowledge, the campaigns that we put together, and how do we present it to women? Because I think that a lot of what we all want to do operates in the domain of politics. It doesn't operate within the existing systems in which the health system works, or the right to housing, education, all these things occur. We have to change the very politics that produces the framework of who is included and who is excluded. And that requires a different way of aligning people and women into this process. I saw in our discussion groups a lot of focus on migration. And my usual starting point when I speak to government officials who are conducting evictions in many southern countries is to tell them that if you can't cope with the migration that you are seeing in your city today, what are you going to do 10 years from now? How are you going to deal with the transformation that is going to happen to cities and to metropolises? And neither he nor, mostly it's a he. We don't have answers. We don't really know, and we have to produce this out of discussions, dialogue, and conversations between different sets of professionals, educators, politicians, and activists, because I don't think we have the answer to these processes. So the bulk of my presentation is the story of the last 25 years that I have done this work, and I thought some pictures would help. So this bunch of people represent the 500-odd men, women, and some of them were children when we started, who form the core of our group that works together in India. For those of you who read about the great story of India, those of us who are inside, we say there are 2 or 3 Indias. There's the shining India that's got a fantastic growth rate and who's stealing IT jobs from all over the world. And then there's another India which is still residing in the 19th century, where people are working in terrible conditions, where migration is occurring because there is no governance. People are fleeing from poverty into more hazardous and difficult situations. And so we live in cities where you have 3 centuries coexisting with each other, all of whom are jostling for space, but where clearly the poor are only surviving because of their volume. Wherever the numbers of poor people are less, they get pushed aside faster. That's what we have learned. This is just to give you a little hint of what the city of Bombay, Mumbai, and Mumbai, these are the 3 names of my city, looks like. This is a very famous railway station that we have. It's something we're very proud of, and it's also part of the unique transport system that we have, which was almost on the point of collapse because of the growth of the city. but it represents some of the changes. I brought this picture in to show you how the city is a mixture of slums and buildings. So all these blue-colored things, this is a picture I've taken last monsoon, and these are all the plastic covers for the rooftops of the huts. So you see that you have all these things in the middle, and the fact is that this is an amazing metropolis in which, officially in the last census, 57% of the city lives in slums. The problem in India has been that we have archaic planning laws where a large amount of people work in the informal sector, but the city is designed only for formal living. And so the only way in which poor people can survive is to squat somewhere close to where they live. All our housing strategies are supply-driven, centrally managed, and rarely reach the poor people. And so all the housing stock in which poor people live is designed 9 out of 10 times by women. It is protected by women. And we believe that if it has to evolve into something better, it must require women's participation. Yet we don't have, within our professional planners, architects, and engineers, capacity and imagination to involve women in this process. We believe that the only way poor people can get a piece of land is to encroach it. It's the only way to get some amenities and services. If you can survive that encroachment for 10 to 15 years, when you become a vote bank for a politician who then will protect you from being evicted, and then your slum gets notified, that's the word we have, which gives you the right to have some sanitation, some water. What you also have is a situation where the largest number of poor people, and there's this constant interesting data that the fastest growth is in Africa, but the largest volume is in South Asia of poor people. But then we have a paradox in India where we have a problem in counting who are the poor people. We have 7 committees with 7 definitions of who constitutes a below the poverty line family. And right now, as we speak, there's a bill coming up for the right to food security, and there's a debate on who's entitled to this. The city of Mumbai or Bombay was built around the textile trade in the 18th and 19th century. All those mills have gone, and all of us in civil society have somehow lost the battle for an urban renewal strategy where this land could come back into the public space and for public housing. All these monuments are gone. I'll probably get a lot of money for these photographs in a couple of years because they no longer exist, these structures. And malls and commercial space and glitzy buildings are taking over this real estate. The history of the city is that men come in to work. This is a bakery. This is the door. These are all the people sleeping around it. And it's only when women come in to join the families that the huts come up. For many years, the strategy of the poor people was that the municipality breaks your house, you build it again. And there was absolutely no acknowledgement of what this did to the poorest people living in the city. It was the absolute leaky bucket of the worst kind, where the state felt no responsibility to do anything to the poorest, most marginalized people in the city. And so it was that in 1984, many of us who worked in this community center were politely asked to leave because we took a public interest litigation against the municipality for evicting these households for whom we were raising money and having creche facilities and health facilities. And we watched helplessly when the city came every month and just demolished the houses. We said, we can't be watching like this, so we took the case to court, and the trustees said, we can't take the risk of the city getting angry with us. So you either withdraw the petition or you leave, and so we left. And we formed the organization, which we call SPARC, to look at how we could actually share the risks that poor people take to survive in the cities. What do we need to do as an institution to do this? And we had imageries of continuing the work we did, of working on health, on education, on identity, on inclusion. And within 6 months of our functioning, the women's collectives who are called Mahila Milan came to us and said, look, all the other things groups of women can manage. We can go and heckle the doctor in the hospital and make sure we get some services. We can do these, we can get, we can deal with the education system. We've learned some of these tricks. But what we can't do is work towards getting a secure home for the next generation of children. We don't want our grandchildren to be living in the same spaces that we are. And that's the basis of how Mahila Milan pushed all of us who had no experience in anything to do with housing, shelter, infrastructure, the politics of land, into this process. So we were formed in '84. We formed Mahila Milan in 1986. And then we met this most amazing group of men who were called the National Slum Dwellers Federation, who had formed an organization in 1974, who came and told us, we'd like to work with you. And all our feminist friends said, no, 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 you can't have an association with these men. They'll overpower whatever you're doing with women. And Mahila Milan said, no, we should work with them. Because in order to make women leaders that are accepted by their families and communities, you need a change of heart by the men. And I'm a little disappointed that I don't see too many men here. Because this is one of the problems to do with what's happening with women's issues, that we are only speaking to the converted. We're not talking to people who don't agree with us. Anyway, this organization, which comprised of men who used to defend their neighborhoods, came to work with us because they acknowledged that when they did public rallies, they used women power to go into these large, we call them gheraos. You go and you don't allow anybody from public buildings or municipal buildings to get out because there's so many thousands of you around, picketing and things like that. So they used women, but they rarely included them in the decision-making. And so we formed an alliance in which Mahila Milan became a sister organization of NSDF. And today, 60% of NSDF's national leadership are women. Not by some percentage, but by the fact that they are terrific leaders and they get voted for this. We also have a commitment that whatever strategy we do, we will not pick the low-hanging fruit. Somehow in development processes, everybody wants to pick something that works fast. And then you try and make it work for something that's a tougher problem and it never works. So we said we'd go for the issue of housing and infrastructure and inclusivity for the worst 30%, and that's how our campaign focused on pavement dwellers. This is what pavement houses look like. They're little lean-tos against the walls and the sidewalk. They're about 35 to 70 square feet. They usually cover the pavements. And a lot of the stuff is done outside the house, the cooking, the washing, all that is done outside. Water is purchased by people who steal it from the municipality. Similarly, electricity is. So we have to tell our government officials that poor people don't cheat. They get cheated by people who steal from you. So these are some of the environments in which some of the families live in. We talked about the crisis of garbage in cities, the menace of plastic. This is what it looks like. So this is what we look like. This is our national network. And what we try to do is create within each of these cities a network of communities that begins to undertake what we call our rituals, which I'll show you in a minute, and begin to collect information about themselves, and begin to dialogue and negotiate with the government, and do collectively things that people can't do as neighborhoods or as individuals. What we find is that despite our working for 25 years, the government is only today thinking about ways to provide tenure to people who live in slums. And this is all part of this realization that urbanization has come to stay, that you cannot reverse urbanization by better investment in rural areas. There's no either or, and that more investment needs to be made in cities. This is a very interesting example of how women's collectives have taken construction and developed it around things that work for them. So here on this side, oops. You'll see over here, this is a funicular roofing material that women can cast themselves. And the size was shrunk to a point where 2 women could pick it up, because the usual size is so big that it would require 6 women to pick it up. So they reduced the size to something that women could pick up themselves. And then here, you have a situation where people actually didn't believe that that roof was sturdy. So these men were made to stand and dance on it for an hour. It's our most favorite picture. What we've developed over the last 25 years are some rituals and practices that are both means and ends. So for us, the women saving money from each other and lending to each other don't follow a classic microcredit formula, but what it does is it has women leaders visiting every single house every single day to collect the change that's left over from your grocery purchases every evening. So you don't save from your income, you save from your expenditure. So for very, very poor households, this is a very important starting point of putting savings aside. And we use this to create a structure by which they learn to lend to each other. And in most cases, this lending is very humble. It's 5 rupees, 10 rupees, it's half a dollar, $1, $10 to buy groceries the next day, or to buy a bus pass to go and find a job. It's all very, very modest stuff. But it does 5 very important functions. One, every home gets visited every day. So if a woman is facing violence in the house, the group knows it. If there's an illness in the family, the group knows it. If somebody doesn't have a job, the group knows it. So this way, the group gets to support each other, and the women get to support each other and their families through whatever crisis they're going through. The second thing is that women learn financial literacy. This is very important. Women don't learn it by sitting in a class and studying. They learn it through transactions. The third very important thing is trust. In poor communities, women live sometimes with neighbors they don't know much about. And this becomes a way by which they get to know each other. The fourth one is, when a group saves for over 3-4 years, this becomes a very important information basis to take to banks to say, why don't you do business with us? And many women have begun to get loans for that purpose. What you see down here is the way in which communities put their information on a blackboard for everybody to see. And this is a woman collecting it every day. So we have all that money is kept in that locality, and that treasurer operates an ATM for that locality. The second thing that we do is we collect information about the households. Municipalities and governments have terrible data about poor. It's not accurate, it's not updated, and it can never be disaggregated. That's our experience. And so the idea is to help poor people decide what data is strategic to collect, how to aggregate and disaggregate it, and our function as their backup organization is to create a database which they can use. The other very important part of our culture is the way in which peer learning forms the most important way by which we collectively learn from each other, agree on what our base values are, what our strategies are, and how we use experiences of success in one locality or in one city to demonstrate to another city and another locality of how to do things differently or better. And so the idea is that women's groups actually visit other cities and other neighborhoods. And we didn't realize when we started it how little mobility women have. That most women who come as migrants to the city just go back home and come back. But they rarely travel to other cities. And the negotiation and the process of getting their families to agree for them to travel to other neighborhoods and cities is a very important element of their own transformation and their emancipation. The other thing is how women negotiate with powerful institutions. Our imagery of, the women's imagery of themselves has always been one in which they go pleading to somebody to do something that they want. And now they've transformed it into a situation in which large numbers of women invite an academic or a government official or anybody that they want to negotiate with into their processes. And we have a rule which applies even to me, that when I sit and negotiate with the community federations, the ratio is 1:40. Because they say that as professionals, you can always give statistics and data and overpower us, and we'll just overpower you with shouting. And so this whole nature of public engagement and collective negotiations is a very important part of our process. And so the idea is that it's very important for all of us to acknowledge that dialogue and negotiations with our government is very critical for poor women. And very often, women have to negotiate with the very municipal officials who have demolished their homes in order to negotiate a strategy for infrastructure, for instance. So how do you get over that? How do you deal with that? And part of the process is to collectively develop the confidence to have that dialogue and negotiations. What we have now are women from different neighborhoods who have negotiated to build toilets, to upgrade their settlements, who then train other people how to do that. And the whole issue of celebrating successes and inspiring other people is very critical. But one of our most important and crucial activities in more recent years has been our engagement with the police. A lot of crime in the city whether it's violence or it's to do with women and property, all these kind of things. There's a general belief that the police always take the side of the elite, and that whoever can bribe the police gets their way. So we had a very interesting police commissioner who decided to experiment with us a strategy in which the police station was represented by what is called the police panchayat. 7 women who are nominated by Mahila Milan, and 3 men nominated by them, and 1 police official, meet once a week and listen to all the complaints from different neighborhoods. And what we find is that 8 out of 10 complaints are from women who would never conceive of going to the police station to make those complaints. And they range from violence to rape to abuse to intrafamilial fights about issues of property, of stealing identity data and things like that. And the strategy is that the panchayat tells it suggests a solution after talking to both sides. If it's accepted, they accept it. Otherwise, then they help both the groups to go to the police station and register the complaint. And there are now 300 of these panchayats in Mumbai, and now they're coming up in other cities. And what we do is we draw our chief minister and our home minister and all these people who actually don't really know whether they like this or not, but when they see large crowds in front of whom they can talk, then they come. So most new panchayats are inaugurated like this with lighting candles. And every neighborhood has this kind of, it has this kind of a board, which is on the top left-hand side, right-hand side there. So there's a board that's the official location of this meeting place, and this process goes on. Now, we are also part of this international network called the Slum or Shack Dwellers International. And what we've tried to do is to use the same methodology of sharing and learning with groups like ourselves in other countries. And what we say is that many locals make a powerful global. So all global organizations don't just have to be comprised of people who do things at global levels, but that many local processes can produce a different kind of global energy. And we look at ways by which the voice of the poor is represented by them rather than people like me in global arenas where discussions about slum dwellers and poor women's issues is taken up. And I hope that the next time you have a conference, you don't invite me, I get somebody from Mahila Milan. That's also my job, is to do things that I do for the first time, and then the second time make sure that I'm replaced by somebody from the community who probably is a much more powerful speaker and speaks more from the heart than I do. This is a bunch of leaders from Shack Dwellers International, most of whom 10 years ago would have hated to go to any international conference, but now represent STI in many different forums. And for me, this image really represents what STI tries to do, which is to take the aspiration of a woman and turn it and transform it into a collective process of knowledge, learning, and transformation. These are the kind of events at which women's collectives internationally now meet to discuss issues that concern them. These women sitting here right in front are some of the original women who formed Mahila Milan. We are all now in our 50s. This is just to give you some examples of what STI does. This is a map of Harare. I don't know if any of you remember in 2005, there were violent evictions and demolitions of parts of Harare. And these are the two aerial pictures that we had. And then soon after that, there was the Vancouver World Urban Forum. That was the third World Urban Forum that was in Vancouver. And the delegation from Zimbabwe was there, and the whole world was so angry with Zimbabwe, nobody wanted to talk to them. But the federation in Zimbabwe caught hold of them and got a commitment from them to reinstate all the stands that were demolished. So we had a very interesting situation where many politically correct activists were very angry with STI for talking to people from the Zimbabwe government, the then Zimbabwe government. But our philosophy is, there's a saying in my language, Marathi, that if you live in a lake where the dominant creature is the crocodile, you can't pretend that you can swim across it and ignore it. So poor people always have to negotiate and dialogue with their tormentors, and the way is to find strategies to do it which are strategic and in which you are not the powerless supplicant. This is in Kampala, where we're working with the municipality to look at the issues of dense slums which the city wants to evict, trying to find ways by which we can change their views. This thing here is a magnificent building where the bottom is the toilet. This is like the community center, and this thing on the top is a hall where the people meet. These are many different communities learning to do construction, to upgrade their homes. This is a very symbolic picture because the savings book that a family has is like your membership card to the Federation. We always say that in dire poverty, women produce houses like this, and our job is to look at ways by which this can be transformed into something which is a safe and secure neighborhood, along with a good house with amenities and services. This is an example of what's been done to that kind of home in a settlement in Nairobi. This is construction which we've done in Mumbai, which is a very dense location, so we've built houses which are 7 floors from neighborhoods where, now this particular neighborhood is very interesting. People live here, and there are buffalo sheds here. So the idea is to get the buffalo sheds out of the city, clear this space, and then build these houses. I bring this picture because one of the things that we do is to get ministers and senior officials to come and experience what women do. And this is Dr. Sisulu when she was the housing minister of South Africa, doing a savings round in Mumbai. And what we did was, by getting her there, we got our own ministers to come, who would otherwise prefer not to be seen with us. This is in Ghana, where 2 very big informal settlements are facing evictions, and we're looking at ways by which they can negotiate with government for upgrading or decent relocation. This is in Malawi, where the city gives land, and we look at ways by which communities can build these adobe houses with some amenities. This is one of the, I don't know how many of you remember the whole Smoky Mountain falling, and this particular community actually got the right to rebuild their own houses. This is in South Africa, in Durban. And what women are saying is that in most poor neighborhoods, the majority of the people are young people below the age of 20. There's an increasing number of very young people in poor neighborhoods. And therefore, the challenge for all of us who work on women's issues is that the generation that's working on this is growing older. How do we create strategies by which young people begin to take on this process and renegotiate the kind of violent relationship that exists between young men and women into one where they work together to transform their neighborhoods? This is my favorite picture. This kid is now 17 years old. I took this picture a long time ago, and he's 17 years old. And he's one of our new young champions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Will you take questions?
Yeah, sure.
Are there any questions?
Hello. The range of activities of SPARC and your organizations is astonishing. You mentioned in passing especially the issue of tenure and land title. Friends of mine in India tell me that is really perhaps the critical issue today and that SPARC is at the cutting edge of it. Could you discuss that a little bit more? And I would guess that there is an issue both of tenure and title at the community level and at the individual level, but I really don't know.
I'm glad somebody thinks we are doing cutting-edge stuff. We think we are really far behind. Actually, what we're looking at is that we're moving away from trying to look at getting a formal title as the first thing that people do. What we're saying is, what we've realized in our work for the last 25 years is that if you can defend your right to live where you are for more than 15 years, which is what is happening, you can actually produce a strategy by which you begin to gradually get amenities and services, you get notified, and then you get some form of collective title which is fuzzy. That's what happens. And then as you do this consolidation, some state governments begin to give you title for the cooperative. That's where we are. But that's in very few states, because in India, housing and municipal administration and land are all state subjects. So there can't be a national law for this. However, there is right now, as we speak, a new government policy that is trying to create a strategy to produce a range of tenure options that will be made available to slum dwellers. But what we find is that the pursuit of one form of title is actually very detrimental. We're also our government is getting seduced into providing individual titles. And if you look at that sea of slums, my challenge is that if a city can't actually, in most of our cities in India, even the formal properties aren't titled accurately. So we wonder where they're going to get the capacity and the resources to provide titles to 30 to 50% of these little houses.
I think we're overwhelmed by the enormity of your work and the success of your work. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.